Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the Lifestyle Show. I'm here with Sharmeen here on the Ramadan FM special on EAVA FM. Today's show we'll be talking about mental health in the community. It's a particularly challenging topic, and I will be joined, hopefully, by a very special guest over there. There's a bit of adjustment going on to the mic here, people. Hearing some weird stuff going on. That's right. Are we all set? Okay. So we'll start that again. You're tuned in to the Ramadan special on EVA FM. This is the Lifestyle Show with myself, Sharmeen. I'm going to be joined via telephone. We're interviewing someone very... We're okay? Okay, we're okay now. I'm going to be interviewing Safira Houghton, who is the co-founder of the Lantern Initiative, which is an initiative through which they raise awareness about mental health issues in the Muslim community. Safira is also a Muslim chaplain, a community radio presenter, and I've just found out she is also trained in youth mental health first aid. So she's got a phenomenal CV when it comes to talking about mental health. Have we got Safira on the line? No? Okay. We'll hope. But so while we're waiting for Safira to come on air, just like to just remind everybody, this is the Ramadan special on EVA FM. We are broadcasting on Facebook, on Twitter, on YouTube, and on the website www.ramadan.fm. We're also broadcasting live on the airwaves on 102.5 FM. So there's lots of ways you can tune in. And in this blessed month of Ramadan, there's lots of very easy ways to earn reward if you are listening in, is simply to share the Facebook feed. If you're on Facebook, just let your friends and family know that to tune in to this Ramadan FM special on EVA FM, so that they can gain some extra bit of knowledge this month of Ramadan and take you forward, hopefully, after Ramadan. So, we now have our guest online. Safira, are you there?
Hello, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
How are you?
Alhamdulillah, how are you doing?
Alhamdulillah, I'm good.
How's Ramadan going?
Good, very well so far. The first couple of days were always difficult, but alhamdulillah, getting used to it.
That's brilliant, alhamdulillah. And just to recap, Safura, if you're just joining us now, Safura is the co-founder of the Lantern Initiative, through which she raises awareness about mental health issues in the Muslim community. She's a Muslim chaplain, a community radio presenter, and a trained youth mental health first aider. And a lot more than that as well. So she's got a lot going on. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us today, Safura.
No problem.
Just want to start the show by saying this is not a medical show. We won't be giving medical advice. Is there anything else you wanted to add on that front, Safura?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on the back of that, I would say that not only are we not giving out medical advice today, but also the Lantern Initiative, we are a voluntary community group. So we do not actually provide counselling or therapy of any sort. We are actually just a support group.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks for clarifying that. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about was talking. The words are not coming out right today, subhanAllah. Better get in gear now. There was an article that I read on your Facebook page, on the Lantern Initiative Facebook page. It was an article in the Evening Standard. It goes back a few years, but a lot of people say this Ramadan, should we be talking about mental health? And I think that article really summed up why we should be talking about mental health, amongst other things. And it was an article which covered a few cases about people who suffered with various mental health conditions, from anorexia to other conditions, and how Ramadan affects them in ways that it's very hard for us to understand, actually. What are your thoughts on that article?
Yeah, I mean, the article talks mainly about eating disorders, anorexia, bulimia, that sort of thing. Ramadan, can be quite a difficult time for people who have eating disorders. And, of course, with sort of the Muslim community anyway, we have quite a lot of judgment around food, eating, healthy eating habits, also we seem to have a bit of an obsession with sort of weight and appearance and that sort of thing. So there's a lot going on. There could be a lot going on for a young person. And then, of course, Ramadan comes along, and if you've got an eating disorder, it can be very, very difficult, actually, to cope with that. But if we look at some of the causes as well of eating disorders, they can be quite complex. That social pressure to be thin. Also, sometimes if there's a family history of eating disorders or of depression or substance misuse, that can cause somebody to develop an eating disorder. Again, also being criticised for eating habits or for body shape or weight. And I'm sure that, many of us have come across this, especially within the South Asian communities. There's a lot of that, kind of being guilted into kind of, if you're eating too much, then, you won't be thin enough to get married. And, and all of these things.
There's a whole host of things on that front, actually.
Exactly, yeah.
And it's interesting, I'd like to pick up on that thing of judgment, because one of the things that came across quite clearly in the article is how not just how, as an individual, you may feel judged if you're not able to fast, for whatever reason, the peer pressure around that. And then what came out of the article was this guilt that you feel within yourself, that this is the month of Ramadan, it's the month where you seek forgiveness of Allah, that fasting is a pillar, one of the 5 pillars of Islam, and if I'm not fasting, am I somehow being deficient as a Muslim? And it was that's what really got me, actually. The layers, there are sort of layers within this that it's hard for us to sort of, at the very surface, we don't sort of see. And with mental health, or with quite a lot of other conditions, because the fasts are so long as well, this is one of the other things, because the fasts are so long, people who are on medication, who need to take medication regularly, and that might not be for mental health condition, that could be for a number of other conditions. They simply are not able to do so. But they look on the outside, that person looks perfectly well and healthy. And I think that's part of it. So you have this constant barrage of people saying, but why aren't you fasting? And I think I do think perhaps it's time to sit back. If someone's not fasting, there must be a good reason for it. And it's not privy to you, or it's not necessary for you to know what that reason is. I mean, have you come across this yourself, or
we have? Yeah, I mean, with mental health, it's very, very difficult because, as you say, it's not something that's visible. It's not something that you can outwardly see in a person, and of course, that person doesn't have to share with you that they have a mental health issue or an eating disorder of some sort, and why they might not be fasting. But I think the pressure to fast, I think, as communities, I think we do put a lot of pressure on ourselves, and I think this specific pressure that young people, especially, must feel in Ramadan to fast is immense. I mean, there is a study that was published in the British Medical Journal in 2012, and it found that actually fasting-related changes in the circadian rhythm and also in sleeping patterns can actually contribute to the exacerbation of psychiatric symptoms. And also on top of that, as you mentioned, Sharmeen, not taking medication at the prescribed intervals, and then, going with that medication for up to 18, 19 hours at a time, it can have a massive, negative impact on mental health.
And on other medical conditions as well. Because dosage is very important in terms of the pharmaceutical, how it gets into the body and how it maintains a particular level in order to manage the symptoms of whatever condition you have. It's just... And coming back to this thing about judgment, you mentioned young people, and it's interesting because I was speaking to some older people in the community, and they were saying exactly the same thing, that they feel this pressure, I want to fast, and they're diabetic and they've got multiple other conditions, and I know from helping care for them in the past that when they do fast, they are completely and utterly flawed and bedridden as a result. But no, I just feel so bad. I've never missed a fast in my life. And, so it's not just young people. It's actually across the board. And in between that, you've got mothers perhaps who are breastfeeding or who are pregnant or who are struggling with their expiation as well, if they're choosing to take that expiation. So there's a whole spectrum of people, actually, who are under this sort of pressure, witting or unwitting pressure that exists around fasting. And part of that, I wonder, is whether because we are supposed to compete in good deeds, we want to encourage people, and where does encouragement end and pressure begin? I suppose that's the question I put you. Well, where would you say is there a way we ourselves can sort of stop and sort of say, well, I'm beyond encouragement now? It's like, when you're nagging someone to do something, when does it become nagging as opposed to encouragement? What are your thoughts on that?
I think the bottom line with regards to fasting and all about expiation and all of that, I think the bottom line to remember is that actually the vast majority of scholars agree that fasting is not obligatory, upon those who are not just pregnant or elderly but also sick and mental health issues and lots of other illnesses come under this. And although this should mean that those suffering with mental illnesses don't have to fast, many actually do end up fasting because of that pressure. And what actually happens is this results in making their illness worse, and it just causes them more harm. So I think one thing that's quite important is there is a real lack of discussion, because even amongst religious scholars, where sometimes mental health is misunderstood and often the wrong advice is given out, considering that those with mental illnesses are sometimes deemed not to be sick enough not to fast. And unfortunately, it's due to some of these attitudes that even those who don't end up fasting, they end up feeling guilty. And then again, on top of that, that guilt then causes further anxiety. So actually, we're in a vicious circle where we're just going round and round and round. And what we need to do is break that cycle and kind of, educate ourselves and others as well in that, this is a very real condition. Just the fact that you can't see the reasons for why somebody might not be fasting doesn't mean that they're not entitled not to fast. And I think we just have to stop being so judgmental as a community. And I guess that's, easier said than done.
It is easier said than done, and I think the long-standing attitudes around that. If you do want to text in your thoughts on this subject today, it's 07450 925 084. That's 07450 925 084. Your text will be completely anonymous. I will not be announcing anyone's name if you do choose to message in today. I understand it's a very sensitive topic. You can also email in to the studio info@ramadan.fm. That's info@ramadan.fm. Just to recap, if you're just joining us today, this is the Ramadan special on EAVA FM. This is the lifestyle show with me, Sharmeen, and I'm joined by Safura, who is a co-founder of the Lantern Initiative. The Lantern Initiative looks to raise awareness about mental health in the Muslim community. So just coming back and just going over what we've been talking about so far in the show, this attitude about judgment and how it affects people's mental health, particularly during the month of Ramadan, and then going on outside of Ramadan. So you mentioned one statistic earlier about how fasting, one of the articles in the BMJ, which is the British Medical Journal, contributes towards, or is seen to trigger further mental health episodes. Did you have any other statistics you wanted to share with us today around mental health in the Muslim community?
Yes, so, if I start at the beginning, the Muslim community in the UK, we know, is largely made up of the South Asian population. Statistically, the South Asian population is least likely to seek medical and professional help for mental illnesses. And when you look at the NHS figures as well, they show that Muslim communities significantly under-refer themselves for mental health support, and yet we're actually almost 50% more likely to suffer from mental illness than our white counterparts. So there's quite shocking figures there.
That is definitely shocking figures.
And of course, before I go into the reasons for why this might be, according to the Mental Health Foundation, sometimes Western approaches to mental health treatment are also often unsuitable and culturally inappropriate to the needs of Asian or Muslim communities. And this is why sometimes suicide rates are higher in young Asian women compared to other ethnic groups. When I first found this out, I was quite shocked. I just thought, wow, out of all the BME groups, suicide rates are higher in young South Asian women.
That's really sad too.
Again, something to let sink in for a moment there.
Absolutely.
But also NHS figures show that a white person with mental health issues is twice as likely to be receiving treatment than someone from an Asian or a black background.
That is very interesting, and it's good to also know that research is now being done into this, and people are taking this seriously, and there is, because I think if you take it back 10 years, when I first remember interviewing someone about this on more than 10 years ago, first interviewing about this, mental health, around mental health, and had a psychologist on the radio, and we were discussing this, and there was not very much known at the time. And it's good to see that dialogue has begun, and that the research is happening, and people are beginning to sort of understand the needs of the community more deeply. The one thing you mentioned there, which sort of strikes me, in terms of provision, healthcare provision around mental health, and how it's not perhaps catering for our communities in the best way, this sort of dichotomy of South Asian or subcontinent Asian culture, whatever you want to call it, versus the Western values, and perhaps how the current provision is around the Western understandings and philosophies and so forth. But I was thinking about this at home, when preparing for the show, and I do wonder whether, rather than a dichotomy, we're now faced with a trichotomy, if that's even a word, where you have the Asian culture kind of thing, and then you have the Western values, and then you have the Islamic culture.
Yeah.
And we're kind of torn not just between two conflicting cultures. Sometimes they conflict, sometimes they agree, but also with the Islamic perspective, what this is now thrown in as well.
Yeah.
Not that it should be thrown in, I'm not degrading it or seeking to degrade it in any way, but we have to talk about what the realities are on the ground. We are raised in Asian households or ethnically diverse households from the wider Western population. We are subjected to the Western values and culture through social media, through TV, and through schools and so forth. And at the same time, we have our deen.
Yeah.
And, there is this attitude, well, if you are religious and you're on deen, you wouldn't, and I've heard this, sadly, I have heard this in the past, if you're on deen and you pray your 5 times salah, you won't suffer from mental health issues. And that's quite a profoundly disturbing statement for people who've experienced and who've seen it the first hand.
Yeah.
When people have got fractured minds. I mean, I've seen people's minds literally fractured, and friends really go through such upheaval in their life. And even though you have experience and you have the knowledge behind you, when you're faced with it directly with someone that you love, someone that you care about, it is terrifying, actually.
Yeah.
And I would love to touch upon that. I mean, we talk about people with mental health, and under referring themselves within the Muslim community.
Yeah.
But how do we contribute as the people around those people suffering? Are we contributing positively? What steps can we take to make sure that the people who we see suffering are going to get the right help?
Yeah. Well, I think going back to what you were initially saying about the generational shift, I think there's definitely been a generational shift, and I think people are sitting up, taking more notice and talking more about mental health now than they used to. But I think also we've still got a long way to go. I think when you look at the healthcare budget in the UK, I think something like 6% goes towards mental health research, which is actually a very, very low figure, considering what large groups they're dealing with, in terms of research. So I think when we look at research and we try to talk about the Muslim community, a lot of it is actually all lumped together within the BME categories. Absolutely. So there's not enough of a breakdown, I think, in the...
If I can just stop you one moment there.
Yeah.
What does BME stand for?
It's now classed as BAME, which is Black, Asian and Minority Ethnic Communities. So unfortunately we do tend to all get sort of banded together in one group rather than looking at, all the sort of nuances and the kind of individual needs that we have as diverse communities. But also when you look at, within the communities, we've got, as you quite rightly mentioned, Sharmeen, young people, they might be coming across sort of, posters about depression or, being talked to at school about mental health issues, and they might be recognising that they're feeling a certain way, but unfortunately they're 2 worlds, or 3 worlds even, as you're saying. They're not merging, they're actually colliding. So if a young person wants to seek help from their GP, they often feel that they can't tell their parents, first of all, because of sometimes cultural norms, the guilt they might feel, the religious guilt they might be made to feel, also some of the taboos that exist within the community. And then conversely, if you look at the older generations, then you've got other more practical barriers, such as, transport, you've got language barriers, interpretation needed, the GP not understanding them if they don't use, mainstream discourse. Because we have to remember that, in many languages, even the word for depression doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist. So how do we recognise
And the measures, just to give an example, I remember taking an elderly lady to get seen by the GP. And it's an Asian GP as well. She spoke within Urdu all the time, but the actual test around memory was done in English. So she was asked to give the months of the year, say the months of the year in English, and then say them backwards.
Oh gosh.
Or some, I can't remember, or numbers backwards, and she was really struggling. And the reason she was struggling is because it's not in her language. And that was an Asian GP who was already doing the consultation in Urdu, but yet when it came to those actual measures, the mechanisms to test, they were in English, and we was reverted to that. And that obviously, it goes with, logically speaking, it's not going to get you the right picture.
No, absolutely not. And this is why I say, there needs to be much more research done, and obviously more tools need to be developed, I think, for, catering specifically for Muslim communities. And I don't just mean Muslim community, I mean any faith group, I think, will have their own very specific needs. They can't just be lumped together in one category and all just be expected to fit into whatever tests they have, that they use to measure these things. Unfortunately, I can say that as an organisation, we often get Muslims coming to us saying that they've been to their GP, they've had the counselling that was offered to them in the NHS, and it hasn't worked for them. And sometimes, I'll give you an example here. We had one young, 19-year-old woman who came to us and said, well, she had lots of pressures at home, lots of family problems and things that were contributing towards her mental health issues. And she'd had depression, so she'd gone to the GP, she'd been referred for counselling, and I think they give you something like 6 to 12 sessions on the NHS, which which she'd quite happily gone for. Now, during these sessions, the practitioner, who isn't a Muslim, alludes to the fact that, there's nothing stopping this young woman from leaving home, and that actually, she could take control of her situation and, help to kind of eliminate some of the problems she's got by, distancing herself from her family. Now, this practitioner, although, very well-meaning, has no idea of the sort of the cultural norms, of the faith barriers that might be stopping this young woman from leaving home. And of course, this young woman then feels completely misunderstood. And then actually on top of that, she's now afraid to sort of open up because of that fear of being misunderstood and misjudged. And of course, having her faith misunderstood. So this is just one example.
Of many.
Of
many examples.
Really, it's not. The counselling has a place. The NHS has a place, and it's very useful. I mean, it does. I'm not saying it doesn't work for everybody. There are many people who do benefit from it quite hugely. But of course, you've got that small statistic of people that will come back and say, well, actually, it hasn't worked for me because I felt completely misunderstood. And so this is why I think it's definitely, I think we need to have more sort of faith-sensitive and culturally sensitive services in place.
And that's got me thinking, really, because on some respects, a lot of the time when we talk about healthcare provision, it is easy to complain that there isn't anything for us. But I think, having worked in healthcare myself as well in the past, that it's often, there has to be a dialogue. We can't say, well, they're not thinking about us if we're not coming forward and saying, actually, this is what we need as a community. And if we aren't clear on that, and we're not giving a clear directive to those providers, healthcare providers, then actually this is what you could do to be more culturally sensitive, because they don't know. I mean, there's such an onus to say, well, they should know how. They've not lived our lives. They've not dealt with the kind of trichotomy of living, or these three different worlds that we live in. They really don't understand as much as they want to be able to. So there is an onus upon us as a community when we're talking about provision of any service, that if we wanted to be culturally sensitive, if we wanted to be able to take care of and include us and be inclusive, that we have a certain amount of responsibility, I feel, this is my personal opinion, to engage with them and to show them and say to them, actually, this is what we need, or this is where it's going wrong.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, this is changing kind of at a more academic level. So we've got lots of healthcare practitioners who are kind of up there in high up places who are trying to change the situation, and they are bringing about lots of research papers and documents to kind of to show there evidence that, that services do need to kind of cater specifically to individual needs. And you've got people like Dr. Ghazal Amir, who works at Leeds University. You've got Dr. Kareem Mita as well. They've carried out some really, really, really good research in the Muslim community and on mental health specifically. But I think you're right, that even as lay people, I think, we shouldn't be afraid to go to our GPs and say, do you know what, I would really like to have a Muslim counsellor, or I'd like to have some faith-sensitive support. And, unless they hear this over and over again, they're not going to do anything about it. And it's something that has to go back to the clinical commissioning group and, and those people out there who are commissioning services, they need to hear about this. But I think you're right. If we don't tell them, if we don't kind of ask for it, then you won't get it. And to be honest, in many areas, I know that there are quite a lot of Muslim counsellors. So if someone was to go to the GP and say, look, I really would like a Muslim counsellor, they will try their best to try and, put you in touch with somebody in your area that can help you with that. It's not the case everywhere because, of course, we know that the health services are already quite stretched. Chances are you'll just get put with whoever is available in your area at that time.
This is a standard thing now, I think.
Yeah.
But it is coming back to the thing of, and just to recap about if people are just joining us, just a quick recap of what we're talking about today. We are talking about mental health in the community. I have been joined in this show today by Sephora, who is the co-founder of the Lantern Initiative, and we've been talking about mental health in the Muslim community, some of the challenges, some of the judgments, and you might be thinking, why are you talking about this in Ramadan? And Ramadan is one of those times, as we discussed earlier on, how Ramadan is one of those times where everybody wants to fast, wants to seek the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but equally there are people in the community who are unable to fast, whether that's mental health condition or otherwise, and how we as a community approach them and not pass judgment upon them, and how if we are struggling ourselves, not to pass judgment upon ourselves. We've also been talking about mental health in the broader sense, some of the challenges that we faced as BAME communities, which is Black, Asian, and minority and ethnic. Is that right, Sephora?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
We love our acronyms, and sometimes I think that's one of the things is that things get lost because people don't understand the words and the acronyms. But that's a side point. So we've been talking about the challenges around that and how provision, perhaps in healthcare provision, perhaps is not meeting the needs of our community, but also as us as a community being able to identify what our needs are and being able to support each other from a grassroots level, which is what the Lantern Initiative is all about, is it not, Sephora?
It is, yes, absolutely. So the Lantern Initiative was actually founded about 3 years ago, and the reason we came about was because we'd identified a real gap in mental health support services for the Muslim community. And then, of course, coupled with the statistics that I mentioned before, we know that the Muslim community haven't got that, they haven't got the same support that their white Asian counterpart, non-Asian counterparts, might have. And I think one of the reasons why we wanted to set up was because we wanted to start being more open and honest about mental health, as a community. If you want me to tell you a little bit more about the work that we do, so...
I think we're going to do that after the break. We've not got long before the ad break. So we will definitely go into more about what the Lantern Initiative does after the break. But just as I said, just to recap what we've been talking about today in today's show, it has been about mental health and community and some of the challenges that are faced. And as I said, Sephora has joined us from the Lantern Initiative. They are on Facebook, the Lantern Initiative. You can look them up. It's the Lantern Initiative, and I think our producer will has put up some links about the article that we were talking at the beginning of the show about Ramadan and the, some of the challenges faced by individuals on that front and the community, and also a link for the Lantern Initiative is also up on the Facebook feed as well. You are tuned in to the Ramadan special on EAVA FM. We are broadcasting on the airwaves on 102.5 FM. We are also broadcasting online, www.ramadan.fm, on Facebook, on YouTube, and on Twitter. And we are, if you want to text in to the studio, you can today on 07450 925 084. So that's 07450 925 084. Stay tuned, and after the ad, we'll be back after the break. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Initiative, a little bit about the Lantern Initiative, what it's about. And I'd like to sort of, how did it come about? How did the Lantern Initiative come about?
So the Lantern Initiative was initially set up in Milton Keynes about 3 years ago. And we started off by doing sort of coffee mornings and kind of, meals out for mums who'd had babies, mums with children who perhaps had no outlet. And we very quickly found that there was a real need, actually, for women to talk to somebody. They sometimes just needed, somewhere to offload, perhaps a shoulder to cry on from time to time. And it sort of evolved from there. So actually, we are a community-based non-profit organisation. And what we do is, so we've got three main aims. The first one is to educate and raise awareness about mental health issues in the Muslim community. Mm-hmm. The second one is to break down the stigma that exists. And so we do that by providing more platforms for Muslims to talk about mental health more openly. Mm-hmm. And I think the more we talk about it, the less of a taboo it becomes, and the more we break down that stigma. And our third aim is to empower communities to help themselves. So this could be self-help, it could be seeking professional help, it could be whatever that person needs in that time. But so that's in a nutshell the Lantern Initiative. We've sort of been very reliant on sort of donations and outside funding, but we have actually teamed up with a local charity called Children of Adam, which I think people may have heard of, who are a UK-based registered charity. And we work quite closely with them, and what we do is we facilitate mental health events, workshops, seminars, training days, things like that.
So tell me a bit more about the events that you facilitate, because I saw something, Dads and Lads, a little poster on your Facebook page.
So Dads and Lads was actually not our project. It was a collaboration. It was done by a local organisation here in Peterborough, where we're based, and it was to get fathers and sons talking more openly. And it wasn't just to do with mental health. It was just for them to talk, to get them talking, because we know that when you talk and when you have an outlet, then, you kind of nip these issues in the bud. And sometimes when you've got mild to moderate depression or anxiety, all you really need is an outlet, all you really need is someone to talk to. You don't necessarily need to seek professional help. And so some of these events have really been about that, about giving people that platform and that opportunity to express themselves and be more open. And typically our events themselves are run by Muslim mental health professionals and practitioners and counsellors. And it just means that when we have Muslims attending our events, they immediately feel better understood. They immediately feel more able to open up, to talk about whatever's bothering them without that fear. Yeah, without that fear of judgment.
There's somebody who's going to understand them, and I think that makes a big difference.
Definitely, yeah.
So some of the other events that you've coordinated, just...
So we've done quite a few actually, Sharmeen. I don't know.
Yeah, I know. I try to keep up with things. I really do.
So I'll tell you about the most recent one we've got coming up, which we haven't actually started advertising yet on social media, but we're doing a training day on Muslim mental health for imams, mosque committees, chaplains, and community leaders. And the reason we thought about doing this, we're doing it in collaboration with Inspirited Minds, by the way, which is a large Muslim mental health charity based in London.
Okay.
And the reason we thought about doing that was because there's still a lot of misunderstanding around mental health, even within the Muslim community. And if we try to educate and raise awareness amongst the people that kind of lead our communities in those positions higher up, so not just imams, but people who are in a position where they're working with the community directly, then we have a good chance of changing their mindset, and then hopefully that will filter down to the community. So this is just sort of a starting point, really, we're doing for Peterborough. Actually, it's going to be open to other people as well. So although the event will be based in Peterborough, we're hoping that imams and community leaders from all over the UK will actually attend. It is a free event as well, and we do try to make as many of those
loves a free event, don't they?
Free.
It's an interesting thing. It's with any sort of field of work or practice or profession, there's always this ongoing continued professional development. You talk about and this is what you've just sort of reminded me of, that there is always this continued professional development, and actually within mental health that's going to be if you're working within that profession, but the imams and other people in the community are going to be first liners. Where do you turn to? And it's really sad, actually. It just reminded me of something. This is Facebook page, They're called Spotted, Evington, Highfields, Leicester, and it's really sad how you find that the people actually post on there and contact that person, and post on there about their social and their their health problems, or they're splitting up with so and so, and it's not the place for it. Actually, it's entirely not the place. But
it's all over the internet. I mean, it's not just in Leicester. I mean, it's all over the UK. I think people do tend to use social media as a bit of an outlet. And anybody who's there at the other end listening, I think people...
And I think I've tagged you on a couple of those posts because I just think, in a way, I kind of think it's so sad that people think that's the outlet, that they don't know where they can seek help. And often think, even though we're in the information age, with all of this at our fingertips through our smartphones, that we're still unable to find and access what we need. For our own health and our own benefit.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's just, with social media, I think it can be very problematic. I mean, you're right. There's lots of helpful organisations out there that are also on social media, but the danger of talking on sort of these social groups and online platforms is that people are full of all sorts of advice, and it's not always the right advice. It's not always correct. And so we always say, speak to somebody who's qualified, speak to somebody who's in a position that can advise you. Don't just put your random messages on Facebook or on Instagram for people to comment on. Because I think also you have to remember that people's experiences are very, very different. So something that might be bothering me, might have a completely different outcome to something that's bothering me.
Absolutely. I've seen this so many times on social media. It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And it can destroy a person further. It has the potential to destroy that person. As the way you said before, how it could just be that conversation which stops a person from going down the route of needing professional help.
Yeah, I mean, this is why a lot of GPs are now going down the route of social prescribing. I don't know if you've heard of social prescribing, where GPs are prescribing for people to have more social contact, to join groups in their area where they get to kind of go to like lunch clubs or community groups, or for mums who've had babies, they can go to mother and toddler groups.
It's really interesting.
Also prescribing things like getting out there and getting exercise. So they've got
exercise one I had heard about. This particular one I had not heard about. That's very interesting.
Look up social prescribing. It's very interesting. I think it's quite a new concept still, but it's really, I think it's fantastic, because for groups like ours who work with people who have mild to moderate depression or mild to moderate mental health issues, it's amazing. It can work wonders. Sometimes that's all somebody needs, is to get out there, join a class, join a regular group where they feel like they belong, they've got a bit of an outlet, they're actually doing something that's beneficial to themselves, from a health perspective. And actually they immediately start to feel a lot better. You go back to them in a few weeks' time and they say, oh, do you know what? I don't really need to see my GP anymore. I'm feeling okay. Whereas when they started off, they actually thought, oh, my God, I'm depressed, I'm this, I'm that, I need counselling. It can be very, very scary. And I think it's quite important to recognise that when what the symptoms are of mild to moderate depression, and then when it actually becomes more serious and can need, more sort of intervention, medical intervention.
And this is interesting. So the thing is, the one thing that comes to mind is it's very, how do we were talking before about under-referring, whereas potentially the Western white communities are far more likely to refer themselves. What do we do if we see somebody struggling, or if we ourselves feel that we're struggling? One of the things that comes to mind in terms of what people think is, well, if we go to our GP, we're just going to be prescribed medication, and we're going to be put on medication. And this is one of the fears about approaching the GP about things we're struggling with in terms of our mind, that if we're just going to be prescribed medication, whereas this actually is something that's new to me, certainly, and it's good to get that message out there that it's not natural, it's not going to be the natural outcome of you visiting your GP that you are going to be prescribed medication. There are other options.
Definitely. I mean, there's two things you mentioned there that I'm going to address. I mean, first of all, that hesitation to access medical help, I think especially in the Muslim community it exists. It's really, really quite bad, because sometimes there's this expectation from within the community or from within the family to suffer in silence despite your problems. And also, you're not allowed to speak out against abuse, you're not allowed to speak out against suffering. Also sometimes reporting things to the police, it's viewed as...
And the family. If you report something, you're reporting the family.
Yes, exactly.
It's seen as that, as opposed to what you're going through. Somehow it's looked upon as they failed in some way. There's this sort of unwritten connection there.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, sadly, connected to that as well is that women are often blamed for any problems within the family, and that's regardless of who the culprit is. It's something you see time and time again, and that might, sort of prevent them from seeking that help. And then coming back to what you were saying about the GP as well, sometimes you've got that fear of things like gossip. People think that gossip might result if the GP is somebody that's known in the community or from within the same community as them, or that's even true. Staff at the surgery are from within that same community. There's that fear that, people will start talking about me or people will judge me.
And they shouldn't have that fear, because really people should be keeping to confidentiality.
Absolutely. But I think, these fears are very real, and you'd be shocked at how many people still think this way. Still think about, because I think, unfortunately, there have been instances where confidentiality has been broken. I have no doubt.
It happens.
It does happen, and it shouldn't happen, and I think, until we start sort of improving ourselves as a community, I think people won't realise that, it's okay for me to seek help. And then on top of that, you've got the social isolation, you've got perhaps language barriers in some cases that might be difficult to access. And then, as well, what we talked about, the lack of culturally sensitive and faith-sensitive services, especially with regards to counselling. So those are some of the reasons for why people might not seek help or seek professional help or go to their GP. But with regards to the treatment options that you're talking about, educating people in that, you don't necessarily need antidepressants or counselling. So sometimes, like we talked about physical exercise, that can be immense in helping with low mood, with anxiety, with panic attacks, things like that. Physical exercise has been known to be, because of the hormones that it releases.
Absolutely, the endorphins.
Yeah, absolutely. And also not just with depression, but also once you've had a baby, I think sometimes it's postnatal depression can cause those very low feelings, those blues as we call them. Again, getting back into exercise as soon as you can is definitely helpful. And I
think being aware of it. Sorry? I think being aware, particularly when talking about postnatal depression, if you are older, it is far more likely, if you've had your pregnancy later on in life, that you are far more likely to be at risk of getting postnatal depression.
Absolutely.
It is not something that it's in you. It is to do with the hormones, and knowing that, I think often when I hear about people who've become pregnant later on, I always say to them, be aware that postnatal depression is there on the cards.
Yeah.
It's there.
Yeah.
If you're aware that it's there, then you yourself are, I think, more equipped to sort of deal with those emotions and be aware that this is where you could be headed. And I've spoken to many people who really struggled, who've been on the edge of it, or who've fallen into it. And it's something, again, you look at a person, they don't seem... And it's not just them. In that scenario, postnatal depression is not just about them. It's also about the child who then loses out on the mother's love and affection because the mother themselves is disconnected.
Yeah.
So that sort of brings me to the next point about mental health not being just one thing. It's not about someone who's got bipolar disorder, or it's not just about anorexia. It's not just about postnatal depression. It might be about self-harm. This is one of the other things, sadly, I've come across in the past, that it rears its head in so many different ways. And in looking at that and thinking about what triggers that, and perhaps we need to sort of think about it in that broader spectrum of things, and that understanding that it is that broad.
Yeah.
And you must see this like on a
absolutely
totally different level to myself.
I mean, like you said, there are so many general warning signs, and it's not just for us to kind of educate ourselves, but also to be aware that if somebody else in our life, a loved one is going through something, then to kind of be, just to know what those signs are so that we can look out in order to be able to help them, or in order for them, to sort of encourage them to be able to seek that treatment or that help. But just sort of taking one step back, I just wanted to summarise what you were asking about with regards to the social prescribing. So there are things like hobbies, peer-led support groups, support from family and friends. You've got volunteering and working as well, which can also help to kind of eliminate some of these anxieties and things like that. And then on top of that, you've got alternative therapies as well. I won't go into those with too much detail, but there are lots of alternatives if somebody is worried about antidepressants or not wanting to go for counselling, there are lots of natural routes that you can look at. And then also you can look at talking therapies. So you've got things like CBT, which is cognitive behavioural therapy. That can be very effective as well. So again, for somebody who doesn't want to take antidepressants, for instance, they can look at something like that.
That's come a long way as well.
Yeah. But these are all things that you can either look up online, or you can also just speak to your GP if you want more sort of information on all of those. But with regards to the warning signs, I mean, as you said, it's not just depression or anxiety. There are so many different things that that we're looking for. I mean, you just mentioned women who have babies later on in life and how susceptible they are to postnatal depression. But how many people know that there is also prenatal depression, and then there's also postpartum psychosis, which is a step up from postnatal depression, which is quite a severe form of a psychosis that can actually be left. It can be very dangerous if left untreated. It can have really serious ramifications for the mother as well as her baby. I mean, I've heard of I don't know anybody personally, but I've heard of cases where the mother has had to be sectioned because her condition got so bad. So I think we need to be able to spot these signs. We need to be able to say, look, this looks like postnatal depression. Let's get you some help before it gets to that point where it's I know we talked about Muslims under-referring themselves, but another thing I forgot to mention was that when Muslims do go into the system and when they do seek that mental health support, chances are that they are at a much more serious stage or more advanced stage of mental illness than other people. And the reason for that is because they hold on for so long, I think in the hope that it will go away or that it will get better by itself. And actually they could have sought help a long time ago. So again, this is something, we're not saying don't seek help and just try to treat it naturally yourself, because I think there are very many cases where you might need medical attention, and sometimes you just need to speak to a professional to kind of understand whether your symptoms are mild to moderate or whether they think you need some more, more kind of robust kind of intervention.
So we've only got a couple of minutes left of the show. The time's really sped past.
Gosh, that's gone really quickly, hasn't it?
Yes. So just to sort of round up, if somebody you know or if you yourself are feeling not quite right, what are the steps that you could take? We're talking about under-referring, but what are the avenues?
Okay, so obviously when we talk about getting help for mental health issues, we're not just talking about depression or anxiety. We're also talking about things like schizophrenia, eating disorders, self-harm. There's Alzheimer's and dementia. There's lots of different things that come under mental health. But definitely, I think the first port of call is your GP if you need to seek help. There are some excellent Muslim helplines out there that are very, very good. They have some trained counsellors there that can help you. So we've got the Muslim Women's Network helpline, and we've also got Inspirited Minds, who have a portal where you can contact them online via social media or via telephone, and they also do Skype sessions. Hopefully we can put those up on the website so that
we'll try and put that up after the show.
Those websites as well, inshallah. But definitely we're also on Facebook and Instagram as the Lantern Initiative, so if anybody wants to kind of just seek more help or just want some advice, you're more than welcome to get in touch with us as well, but also stay kind of informed of the events and things that we do, which can be quite helpful in understanding mental health.
Brilliant. Thank you today for your time, Sephora. I've been joined today at the Lifestyle Show with Sephora, who is from one of the co-founders of the Lantern Initiative, tackling and raising mental health awareness amongst the Muslim community. Inshallah, we will be back next week talking about various other lifestyle show topics on this very special Ramadan special on EAVA FM. Do stay tuned to Ramadan FM. There's plenty of other shows coming up throughout the day, and thank you for taking the time to join us. Thank you, Sephora, for joining us.
Thank you for having me on.
No worries. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.